Howdy ho guys, welcome back to the channel. Today another installment of wrecking more things and spending more money. Basically today we're going to dig into the rear end that I have that I want to put into the Ranger here. This is the Ranger right now has a 7.5 open diff. This is going to be the 8.8. It's actually out of a Ranger, I believe like a 91, 92 Ranger. So it's got the right width from end to end there, and basically want to get started on it so I can end up getting it put in the vehicle probably later this winter or something. But today I'm going to start by this bracket here is going to stay, but the other side here, this one right here, I had to cut off because this bracket needs to be flipped this way. Basically, this is how this rear end sits in the vehicle, just like that. My left hand here would be the driver's side, that's the passenger side, but it sticks down underneath instead of that one right there, which faces forward. This one faces backwards because the shock, or I should say because the way I have the fuel cell mounted, the fuel cell sits right behind the rear axle, so the shock would get in the way. So yeah, basically you got to mount that this way. What I'm going to end up doing, set that there, just take my little angle finder, my little cube, slap it on here. Just being the axle's not going to move, figure out the same angle, mount this one at the same angle, and then just double check to make sure it's kind of facing the right way if I have to kind of fudge it a little bit one way or the other. But for the most part it's just going to mount right on the front, or mount towards the front, and then I can kind of tack weld it and then double check to make sure it's kind of matched. And then once I get that bracket welded on here, basically what I want to do is take the wire wheel to this whole thing, clean all the rust scale and grease and everything else, and then I'll end up painting it. Probably pour 15, put it in that, and then just give it a top coat over the top of that, and then I can actually get started on rebuilding, putting the gears back in and rebuilding that whole rear end and putting all new bearings and whatnot in there, slapping the axles in and stuff, and then basically it should be able to just swap right out with the other one. So. Okay, got it tacked on there for right now. Checked it, and I'm less than a half a degree off of this side. Alignment looks okay. And basically now I should be able to fully finish welding it, and we should be good to go. So pretty quick little modification, and then we'll be able to start taking a wire wheel to this thing and cleaning this thing up. Alright, we got this thing all sanded down, or wire wheeled, so it's looking pretty good here. I'll have to wipe it with some acetone or something to get just the dust off of it, but it's pretty good on both sides here. We'll get some pour 15 on there probably tomorrow. It's getting late in the day, towards the evening, and good thing because I'm a total mess right now, just sweating and dusty and everything. I got the fan going through that hole back there, trying to get all this dust off of here, but yeah, on to the next step, I guess. Okay, so now that the rear axle was all cleaned up, wire wheeled and everything, I got some paint put on it. I got 2 coats of pour 15 and 2 coats of just spray can, rattle can, black paint, kind of a satin finish. So yeah, basically once this dries here overnight, we can get that start going together. All right, so we're going to get started on reassembling this thing. Actually, first I need to drive out the two races for the pinion down in here. As you can see, we'll get those driven out and get the new races put in, but basically this is all cleaned up. I actually installed a new wheel speed or axle speed sensor. I don't need it. I won't be using it, but the old one was pretty beat up, and I need something kind of to plug that hole there, so replace that. I also drilled and tapped out a plug on the bottom of the differential so I can drain oil. So found a spot right there for it. It's magnetic too, so any debris or filings or whatever can fall into that little spot there. And then you can see where the hole is down here for the fill. So and this way I won't necessarily have to take the cover off to drain it. I can just drain the plug. So that wasn't too hard to drill and tap that out. But otherwise, I got the parts that I'm reusing all cleaned up. The ring and pinion here look pretty good yet. They're in real good shape. So I'm going to reuse those. I got those washed up. I'll throw the tone ring back on there too. I got the bearing taken off of here because we'll be replacing that. So I used a bearing splitter and a press to get that off of there. Otherwise, we got the two caps here for the carrier, and we got the cover, all cleaned up. This is actually a fiberglass, from what I can tell, cover. I've never come across that before, but this is all parts off of a 92 Ranger, so I'm sure they cheapened out, and instead of a nice metal one, they went with that fiberglass one. This way it's lighter, I guess, so any unsprung, less of unsprung weight that we can get, the better. But this is the new differential. This is a Eaton TrueTrac 28 spline, because we'll be reusing the axles, which should be sufficient. So I really like these TrueTracs. I got one in the other car, and I don't know, they just work great, and there's no shim packs to wear out or anything. You don't have to run any friction modifier in the oil. They work so great. So I recommend them, and that's what I'm going to throw in there. So, and then we got the bearing kit here that we'll be putting everything in. So we'll get started here on driving these two out, and basically start with getting that pinion adjusted right, and then we can throw the carrier in. Obviously, I've got a Raytech pinion setting tool here, so we can measure too. I bought that years ago when I did my rear end on the other car on the 8.8. So these come in handy, and we'll use that for setting the depth. I'm going to see if measure this is the shim that was on this pinion when I took it apart. So we'll measure that, and that'll probably get us pretty close, but we'll double check with the pinion setting tool and go from there. So, all right, we're going to get these new races pounded in here. Make sure that the surface area in here, or this hole, is all cleaned out. Sometimes metal shavings and stuff will get hidden in there, or get into the corners and stuff and stay in there, and somehow work their way out later or something. So make sure that's clean on both sides here, and then we'll just drive this in there. We'll put a little oil on the outside, just a slight amount, just so it's not totally dry. You can either use a bearing race tool installer, which I don't have. If you're got a steady hand, you can just take a punch and keep working your way around it real slow, just to make sure that you don't hit the bearing surface where the bearing rides, and gouge that out or something. But I've always had decent luck with just tapping it in. So before I put the bearing on here, so we can check the pinion depth and stuff, according to the Raytech instructions here, if I don't have a checking distance number on here, a lot of aftermarket stuff will have the checking distance number on there. What I'm supposed to do is measure here, the thickness of here, and that would be basically from where the shim surface or bearing surface would be. There's a little bit of a step, if you can see that. Not here out by the tooth, but on the bearing surface there. And then to this side, and measure that, and then you have to subtract it by a measurement of the 4.420 that's in the instructions here. So It's a little tough to get the caliper on there and get a decent reading, just because it's so wide here and smaller there, but basically you're just, I ended up going this way, kind of slipping between the two teeth, and you take your measurement like that. I did notice that I had a few different measures or distances, as you can see. So I just took like 6 different spots and measured them there, and then I took the average of it, which is 1.879, and that should be pretty close, or get me where I need to be anyway. So but I think what I'm going to do is start off with this. This is the 30 thousandths shim that was on there to begin with, so we're going to throw that on there because I hate to keep coming off and on with that bearing, because that's not good for it, especially when you have to use a bearing splitter. So we'll throw that on there first, and then we'll get this bearing on there. I'm going to try and use a punch, work my way around and drive it down. If that doesn't work, I'm going to have to put it in the press and push it down all the way and get it seated right. So sometimes they're real stubborn on there because it's a real press fit. So we'll do that next here. So pinion head bearing is on there. We're going to stick this in here because we're going to get that mocked up. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the other side bearing on and nut and everything, and just take up the slack of any play that might be there. I mean, you honestly probably could just push down on here while you're doing your measurement and keep this steady and probably get the same measurement. But we'll, just so we don't, if you had 2 people, you could do that. But with just me being here, we'll put the other bearing on. You're not putting the crush washer or the seal in. You're going to throw the yoke on. There, it feels like we're snugged up. I'm just going to try it one more time after rotating it. Oops, let's try that one once. Oh. Okay. All right, so that's in. Now next we're going to grab the tool here. And this tool comes with a little plastic piece that goes right in here. There's a little shoulder in here, so you press it down in there, and that sticks out the bottom here, and that's supposed to go right in this centering hole here on the pinion head. I guess what I've found is sometimes if you're not paying attention, if you don't drive that into there far enough, the plastic piece will actually hold it up off the pinion head, and then you get a bad reading or an inaccurate reading. So I popped that out of there. You can kind of see, if you got a light overhead, you can see where the center is anyway, through the hole when you look at it. So I just set that down in there. And I look for that little reflection of the centering hole and get it centered in the hole and hold it there. Now what you're going to want is this side right here of the tool to be up against the shoulder of the axle tube here. And that's touching. Basically why you want that is you're going to want to be, wherever this hole is here, this is where you're going to stick the dial caliper through here to measure it. You're not going to want to be up the slope of the bearing surface here. When you measure it, you want it pretty close to dead center at its lowest level to get your most accurate reading. So that's the purpose of doing that. So they want you to put that in there and up against there, and then you should get a good accurate reading. And you're just going to stick the dial caliper in there and take that measurement. Alright, so we got our tool centered in there, up against the shoulder, and we take our dial caliper here, and we take the rod end, stick it down in there, push it down until it stops, And we have a measurement of 0.5920. I'm going to write that down. Okay, and I'm also going to double check that just so we don't have bad measurements. I always like to go back and slide this to 0 just to make sure it does 0, that I didn't bump it and re-zero it when it was out here. So it's a good thing to do, I guess. Good habit anyway. So we'll get that centered in there. And come on. Okay, that time we got a little bit different reading there. Let's try that again. That was a 0.5825. There's a 0.5945. We'll go from this side once. Might be able to read it better. So we got it centered on the pinion. I got it up against the axle tube there. Biggest thing is to get this bottom edge flat or parallel flush with the tool there, just so you know you're not rocking left or right a little bit. And that's kind of, I think, what I'm struggling with here. We got a 0.5815. Get that on there again, centered up against the axle housing. Trying to look at the reading and keep this thing straight isn't the easiest thing in the world. Square measurement, maybe it doesn't need to be this precise, but I like to be, I guess. I think we got it there. 0.5865. 0.5865. So now what we need to do is we need to take that measurement, which was 0.5865. We need to subtract it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on here. There's a dimension right there, which is 3.108. That's just the dimension of this tool, basically. But we need to subtract that dial caliber measurement from this, and we'll get a number. So we have our measurement of our tool, which is, where we go? Which is that one, 3.108. We're subtracting what our dial caliper said, which is 0.5865, and that gives us a 2.5215. Now, per the instructions when we measured the head of the pinion, the head of the pinion was 1.879 thickness. We're supposed to subtract that according to the instructions by this number. I'm not sure where this number comes from, but it's 4.420, and that gives us a 2.541. Now basically we take those two numbers, this number minus this one here, and that should give us what we need to add for shims. So I already have a 30 thousandths in there, and basically we're roughly 20 thousandths off here. So we will have to take that bearing back off and put in another 20 thousandths. So I'll have to get that pressed back off there and put in some more. So pinion's in for now. We may have to pull this back out just to get adjust the shims on there once we check our tooth pattern. But I want to get the bearings put on, the carrier, put the ring gear, get all that in there, test or check the tooth pattern, and then we'll adjust it from there. But Alright, so I got both bearings, carrier bearings pressed on there. I wasn't able to use like a punch and a hammer. It was really tough to get it started, so I ended up having to use a press, but both of those are pressed on, just got a little bit of grease on there. And we're going to get that ring gear put on here, and also the tone ring for the would be the ABS or axle sensor. This is basically a press fit around here. There is a little tab right here that you have to watch out for, and then there's a little slot or groove here. The factory one's a little bit different as far as the slot, so you're just going to have to pay attention, but it will fit over there. Basically, once we suck the ring gear onto there, that'll press fit and push that on. So I'm just going to get a few bolts started, and then I'll flip it around, and then we'll be able to go through the pattern and get it all started. Okay, so I got the ring on there just barely with these are the old bolts that came out of there. I have new ones over here, but I'm going to draw this up with the old bolts, and then once that's all up there, I'll take them back out, use the new ones, put Loctite on them, and then torque them down. So I'm just going to kind of go on a star pattern like you would on a wheel when torquing a wheel down, and just kind of go half to a full revolution on each one, and just jump all the way around until it's all the way sucked up. So alright, got that drawn up and tight there. So I'm going to take all these bolts out, put in the new ones, torque them down. We should be good to go. So. Alright, so I've been doing some testing as far as where my gear tooth pattern is. And I'm not having a whole lot of luck or where I want it to be. You can kind of see right here, this would be the drive side or forward as it's going down the road forward. I'm getting just this thin line right here on the toe of it. On the back side, it's on the opposite side, right there. So there's a thin line on the heel side of the tooth. That would be the coast or reverse side. So it looks like the pinion is just barely, making a line on there. And that's not what we want. We want a nice kind of wide pattern towards the center, even towards the toe just a little bit, because under load it kind of flattens out just a little bit. And from what I can tell, here's another look on this side. Again, it's on the toe here on the drive side or forward. And then I don't really see it on the back side there on that one, but you can kind of see where the pattern is too a little bit. It's way towards the front on the toe on that side, and on this side it's kind of towards the back. Not a very good pattern, and from what I can tell looking online at different diagrams and where the pattern is, it's telling me that I have too much pinion, or the pinion is too deep. So on one side it's way on the toe, on the other side it's way on the heel. So it says to take out some of that pinion shims basically. So I went back, it's basically between the bearing and the head there. So I had added 20 thousandths to it after measuring and stuff before. I'm actually going back to back down. It was at 50 with that tooth pattern there. I'm going back down to the 30 thousandths that was in there from when I took it apart, basically from when Ford put it together. Being this is stock, I'm going to try that and run a tooth pattern and see how that comes out. Okay, so I got that 20 thousandths shim pulled out of there. I got the backlash somewhat close. I'm going to check the tooth contact pattern again. So I got 3 teeth here coated. Basically what you're going to do is just take and kind of put some pressure on it and rotate it through. You want to make sure that your teeth are kind of pressured one way, and then you load it the other way, just so you get a good contact patch on both sides. So we'll give it a shot here and see what happens. But I just basically hold on to this, put a little resistance, and then turn the pinion. So spin it through one way, and then I'll put pressure on it, spin it through the other way. And actually looks pretty good. Let's double check that again. All right, so here's our tooth pattern after testing it. It looks pretty darn good. This is the drive side, and it's fairly centered. Leans a little bit more towards the toe. Like I said, under a load or under pressure, the teeth kind of straighten out a little bit. So that would extend a little bit more into the middle, but it's pretty good there. As far as from the top to the bottom side, it's pretty centered that way too. You can see it. I could use a little bit less backlash, I think, but not much. Currently, with it just sitting in here, pushed in there, I'm at, I think, 13 thousandths backlash. I think Ford calls for between 8 and 12, so it's right within spec pretty much, especially for a used one. This one looks a little bit too much, maybe towards the toe, but I don't know if that's just the way that one ended up. But it's still, I like it way better than what it was. As far as on the coast side or reverse side, you can see there again, it's a little bit high on the tooth to this side, so that's where a little bit less backlash would help with that. Maybe get down in there just a little bit, but I think the pattern is pretty good and sitting where it should be. So I think I'm going to try and mess around with the shims a little bit and see if I can get just a hair less backlash. I don't know if it's going to work, if I'll have the right shims or what, or if I just leave it at 13 and run it. It'll probably be pretty fine, but you can kind of see too that, we can get a good shot there, the pinion has good wear all along the, you can see the paste on there, almost the full tooth length there, and that's good too, you want that. So I'm pretty happy, we're real close. So like I said, I'm going to mess around just a little bit, see if I can't get shifted over just a little bit, but we're getting there. So pinion depth and backlash is all set, so we should be able to tighten down the carrier mains here, or the main bolts. I'm going to put a little Loctite on them when I tighten them down, then I torque them to 80. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the final assembly of the pinion with the crush collar and the seal and the bearings and everything. So, but first I want to get these tightened down, torqued, and then we can flip it over. One tip too is always kind of make sure that before you take these apart or these main caps off, always try to see if there's any identification marks on here. Like here, there's two triangles on each one pointing out, so you know you got the right and left, and it's best to match them up and keep them the same side when you go back together, unless you're replacing them or something. But just pay attention to that when you take it apart. All right, we got to flip back over. I pulled that bearing back out and got all that out of the way here because we got to throw this crush sleeve in first. So that'll go in. Then we'll put our bearing back in. And then we have a little washer, or they call it an oil slinger. Very important that we put this in there. Basically it just takes any oil sitting down here and it flings it up into the bearing. So always make sure you keep that or watch for that when you take things apart. So that'll go in there. We'll be able to put our seal in next. Tap it around real nice like that, nice and even. Then we'll be able to put our yoke on. to put just a little bit of oil on it. Just kind of around the outside here. So it slides in that seal all right. And if you want to put a little bit on the splines too, that's fine. And this one does have a little dust collar on here, or dust shield. You don't necessarily need that, but it does kind of keep the debris out of there. Helps keep that seal lasting longer. There is no specific way to put this on. There's basically any which way you put it on here, it's not balanced or anything like that. So just slide it on in there. Then we'll be able to put the nut on and torque it down. The nut too, I'm going to put just a slight bit of oil on the bottom side, the washer part of the nut, just so it slides a little easier when we're trying to torque it, so there's no resistance there. Okay, according to Ford directions, or the manual, it says you want a minimum of 140 foot-pounds. Now that's to tighten this thing down. They're basically just saying it's going to be that tough to tighten this thing down to get that crush collar to crush a little bit. But once you have it tightened where the play is out of it and stuff like that, right now I got play in there. Once you get that play out of there and you keep tightening it down, then you want to take an inch-pound torque wrench and you want to spin it. Now the spinning force is only going to be, I think for used bearings, or for new bearings, which these are, it's 16 to 28 inch-pounds. So your inch-pound as you're spinning it should be, there should be that much resistance when you spin it. So don't just torque it to 140 and then that's it. That's just, they're saying a minimum. It could be more than that to final torque this thing down. So they do make it a tool, or you can make a tool that bolts on here and you have a long lever. I'm just going to use this punch. I'm just going to stick it through one of the holes. It's going to catch the webbing on here. That should work for me. You've got to be a little careful that you don't screw up the threads in here, but we should be okay. As long as you're not ramming on it, it's just going to spin and hit, and then we're going to be good. So I'll torque this down and we should be good. Okay, our play is taken up. I can feel a little resistance here. That's going to be our, we're going to check with the inch-pounds. I think we got to go just a little bit more and then we'll test it. Whoops. Okay, we'll check that real quick. Okay, so we're going to check this. The pinion preload. Basically we're looking for 16 to 28 inch-pounds on new bearings. Used ones are a little different. I have a beam style torque wrench, inch-pound torque wrench. I wish I had a dial inch-pound torque wrench. They're a little bit better, I guess, for this, but this is pretty good. So basically we're just going to use this, and what we want is the resistance as we spin it. So it's going to obviously be a little bit more resistance as we get it rolling, and then to stay rolling is kind of what we're looking for, that amount of resistance. That's why a click style torque wrench doesn't really work as good, where a dial and a beam style are way more accurate and better. So let's check it real quick here too. And we're getting about 5 inch-pounds to turn that. So we got to tighten it up a little bit more yet. All right, there's 30. I'm a little high on the high side. I don't really want to back it off and loosen the nut up, but 30 I would call that pretty good, because it was 16 to 28 for new bearings, so we're right around 30 the way it looks, maybe just a hair under. So yeah, we should have this all assembled. The nut is tight. We're at about 30 inch pounds for rotation here. I'm happy with that. Seals in. Everything else should be torqued and tightened down. This is all torqued down, ready to go. We'll be able to throw our axles in, and I actually want to put disc brakes on this thing too. I'm not sure if I'm going to try and throw it on before I throw it in the truck, or put the axle in the truck first and then go in. I'll probably at least get the brackets on the ends of the axle, so we can kind of cover that as I'm doing that. But it should be buttoned up, and yeah, we'll be able to put oil in it and stuff, and then shut the truck down at some point and throw this thing in. All right, we're going to get a little lithium grease on these bearings, axle bearings, just to pre-lube them. I don't have much left here, but then we'll get the axles thrown in, get the C-clips put on, and then with the TrueTrac there, differential, it's got a little bit different setup, or not terribly different, but it looks a little different than the factory 4 to 8 inch traction lock or rear end. It's got this little plug here that goes in there, and that keeps the axles apart, versus there's kind of that S spring in the factory ones. And if you didn't know, there is a left and a right to the axles. Usually one axle is shorter than the other. So you pretty much just have to match them up and just see which side the differential is offset inside here. So figure that out and put them in. This will be our right. Just be careful not to damage the seal when you put it in. Okay. Right one's in, I'll kind of push it in a little bit further than where it usually sits. We'll get the C-clip in there. See if I can do this without a magnet. Okay, then we push it back out. And that one's in there. We'll grab the left-hand side one. Okay, get that in far enough. Get this C-clip put in there. Push them back out. Then those C-clips can't get out because they sit in, they're kind of a groove in the gear there, so they won't fall out. You don't necessarily need those O-rings on the axles, if there are any. It just kind of helps them hold in place when you're pushing them in there. We got those pushed out. That differential's working. Okay. All right. So here's our remaining pieces. We got a plug, basically a axle spacer, and then the snap ring. This will actually sit down in there between the two axles, and then this will go on top of it like that. Keep it in there, and then the snap ring will hold all that in there. So, might need a magnet for that one. There we go. Fits in there pretty snug. A little bit loose in there, so it kind of floats. I think what we're going to do is squeeze a bunch of grease in there, just in case the oil doesn't get in there from when they fill it. Spin the axle a little bit. Okay. All right, we'll get our plug in there. Hopefully we can get it in there. There we go. Now we just need our snap ring pliers. All right, snap ring is in and that plug's in, so this should be set up here or all ready to go. We could probably throw the cover on next. I just want to final clean anything that's in here, any dust or dirt that I may have knocked in there. Otherwise, I think this axle is ready to be thrown in other than putting the brakes on. So I'll show you in a little bit here in just a minute how those brakes are going to go on and all about how I kind of found the kit to go on here. So. Okay, so the axle is basically done. I got to put oil in it, and I'm going to rob the magnetic plug off the old axle, put that on there. Otherwise, I got the cover on. Like I said, just got to put some oil in it once I get it in there. Right now, I want to start mocking up the rear disc brakes that I bought. I basically bought a kit for them, and it's a Right Stuff. You can see that. Right Stuff brake kit. This one says 8 to 9 inch Ford rear end, but it's for an 8.8. Basically, I went through, kind of had to do my homework on this. Well, I'll show you the part number here. Part number there is a ZDCRD03. If you look on their website, they claim that this kit, which comes with the parking brake cables, brake hoses, 2 rotors, 2 calipers, and basically the brackets that go on the end of the axle, and they also come, you can weld these on for the brake lines onto the axle too, and then the hardware there. If you look on their website, or if I bought this through Summit Racing actually, but if you look through there, they say that this kit will not work on a 8.8 rear end truck application, only on passenger cars. And basically, after doing homework on it, the biggest thing is that this bracket here, which would mount on this flange right there, basically does not fit. And this is kind of a chart of the different flanges that they make kits for. This is the one here, 8.8 ZDCRD03 was the part number. And you know, I measured the distance for the bolts, that was all the same. Basically, the one thing that if you have to be careful is that the diameter of the end of the tube right here, where your axle bearing would be, you have to make sure that's the correct size. Kind of want to make sure I get this right here, but had done some, looked on the old interweb there, and the Ranger Station forum website had a good layout here. It talks about different sizes of axles. Basically on the passenger cars, this bearing is smaller. On most truck applications, like some newer Rangers, let me see what year here. I think all the way up to 2003 or something it's set in here. You can have different size bearings, but so this axle here is a 1992 out of a Ford Ranger. It's actually 2 inches narrower than anything 93 and newer. This is like 56.5 or something. The newer ones are 58.5, so it's 2 inches wider. It's just because it's on this older of a truck, they're a little bit narrower. So make sure you pay attention to that too if you're swapping any axles in and out. But it's off of a 92, and this is would be considered a 2.8 inch, I think, OD, if you measure the outside here. But the bearing itself was a, let me see, a 1563 is the part number. Let me see if I can get in there on that. 1563. Anything that has a 1559 is a bigger bearing. So I think the inside diameter of the actual bearing itself was like 2 3/4 or something like that, or no, 2 1/2 or something like that, because you have the thickness of the axle tube itself. It kind of boils down to what this is in, and if it is a 31 spline or 28 spline axle. Anything that's, from what I can tell, anything that's a 28 spline axle has that smaller bearing in it. If it's a 31 spline in the differential, then it's got the bigger bearing. And I think most of the newer Rangers had the 31 spline in it. The Ford Explorers, I'm trying to think what else had it in there. I think that's just the two. Then you have your F-150s and stuff like that might have run an 8.8. But as far as Explorers and the Rangers here, they either had 31 spline or 28 spline, and so small and big bearing accordingly. Yeah, here it kind of shows the axle bearings, if I can get that in the light right. Ford Ranger 88, 28 spline, OD of the bearing, which is a 1563, is 2 1/4. Basically 2010s and 2011 in a 28 spline 8/8 axle uses the larger 1559 bearing. So there's basically 1 year of the Ford Ranger that's a 28 spline that would have that bigger bearing, but it also has a wider axle, so it wouldn't fit in this truck anyway. So basically anything else with a 28 spline would work. So I've already kind of taken, which one was out here? Sorry about the noise. So if you look, there is kind of a small flange on the end here. You would have to clear that. And it does, and it fits on there nice and snug. And then we just bolt it right on, and then the caliper would bolt on. So this will work, even though they say it won't fit on a truck. If it's a 28 spline, it will. Willwood also sells a kit that they say will not fit on here. I believe that's the same issue. Just depending on what spline axle you have, it may or may not fit. This was a little bit cheaper than Willwood's. I kind of looked at Bear brakes too. They didn't really have anything. So I think this kit will work great. And I want to get this mocked up. I also had to get a new master cylinder because we're switching from drums to disc in the back. I also picked up a proportioning valve here, adjustable proportioning valve, and we'll get rid of the factory one and get that all plumbed in when we actually swap the axle over. I did go with a 1.1/8" bore on here because I think eventually I'm going to be switching to Hydro Boost instead of the vacuum booster on there. It'll help make room for, it'll just make room, let's just say it's going to make room for extra width in there if we want. So that'll help. So it's just a matter of kind of mocking everything up, make sure it all works, and kind of plumb the axle a little bit with some brake line. I did pick up some brake line and some fittings here, so I'll just make my own brake lines and try and see if this will all fit. One thing too is if the brakes and or the calipers and rotors will clear my rims, which I'm pretty sure they are. It says 15-inch rims and bigger basically should clear it. I got 17-inch rims on mine, and it looks like there's enough space there too, as far as the caliper is not going to hit the back side of the spokes. So I'm going to start mocking this up and just see how it goes. All right, got everything mocked up. You can see it turned out pretty good. Everything bolted right on. Everything fits. So like I said, you got to kind of do your homework, and they say that it won't fit on a truck application, but it does fit on here. So I'm not sure who makes their calipers for them, if they do make their own. I will be honest, I'm not real excited about kind of how wonky the brake pads go in here and how it's mounted, but I mean I think it'll work just fine. It's just kind of when you're trying to put everything on all at one time and hold the brake pads in there, and they're kind of, you know, this brake pad here, it's not tight right now, but there's nothing really holding this brake pad in other than it kind of wraps around on the bottom here. There's a flange on the bottom, and then it kind of wraps around right there too. You can see it on top too. So it just kind of laps. So it's just kind of floating there. So I don't know if that's going to make any rattling noise or not, or if that's going to be okay. It's the inner one that I don't really care for. Maybe I can show you on the other one that I don't have on. I'll take this one out of the bag quick. Get this little foam piece out of here. Maybe we can see it. Let's dump that out of the way. There's kind of a metal clip. If I can get it out. Yeah. Oh, I got the bolts in, so let's these bolts come out. So those bolts kind of hold everything in. Once those bolts are in, it's pretty sturdy. I'll get them out of the way. That's the mounting bolts. So there's this little metal clip right here that the bottom side catches the piston, and then the top side here loops on the top, or catches on top of the brake pad like that. Kind of loops over the top. A little hard to do, but catches over the top like that, and then you hook it into the bottom of the piston here, kind of like that, and then all slides in. And then there's a little bit of pressure to push up so the bolts clear through and go all the way through like that. So once you get that, like I said, the bolts through, then everything's kind of tight and it's not so bad. But to try and hold all that in there, and brake pads are trying to fall out and stuff, if you would have had to do this in the vehicle with a hose or something on it yet, and trying to hang on to that, and yeah, it would have been kind of a pain. And then the other thing to this is with the kit, they send 3 different spacers right here. to space this out a little bit. It said to start with the medium. This is the short ones. I started with the mediums, and I noticed there was, you know, some play here, so I thought, well, I'll try and get it centered more. So I put the shorter ones in to move it over this way, and that worked, obviously, but I think I'm going to go back to the mediums, just because the caliper slides on those bolts there. Right now it's all the way to the left, and then you can see as I don't know if I can do this. Oops. It slides over that way, up against the bracket. And right now, there's kind of a little bit of, this is, let me see, that's pushed all the way that way. And then the piston will come out, well, it's halfway through this travel here almost, or a third of the way basically. It's going to slide on this little spacer in here, and then it'll actually slide on the head of the bolt once the brake pads get low enough. So I want to make sure that this is slid over up against the caliper so I have as much travel on here when the pads are wearing. So if I move this bracket out a little bit, it'll move the caliper this way kind of on that travel area. So I'm going to switch back to the mediums, and those will work good. And then it'll just be the play of the piston coming out to take up the gap. And I think once if you ever put this kit on, you'd be able to see this too, and maybe a little hard to explain on camera here, but I think you'd understand when you bought the kit. So all in all, I like the kit. It's got 11-inch rotors, which are fairly big for the rear on this thing, but I eventually want to upgrade the ones in the front to a little bit bigger. I think there's 9 or 10-inch rotors on there from the factory. So we'll see, but I think this will work just fine. You know, for the price that I paid for it, wasn't too bad. So we'll kind of get those medium spacers put back in there and try and mock up where we're going to mount the hose off to this side, and then we'll do the other side too over there. But just kind of threw it together here first to see if everything will fit, and it does. All right, got my lines bent up here, basically installed. Wasn't too bad. I'm going to be reusing this T-fitting. This is just when I bought the used rear end here, this was on it. So this one in the truck will be reused, so it's just a matter of disconnecting these and hooking them up when I put the axle in. But basically next step is to throw the axle in.